episode 726 of the podcast that is Assuming America, the Aaro Right Sports Podcast presented by Betfred Sportsbook. It is Friday, June 26th, 2023. People, I hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody is having a great day, and I hope everybody is ready for the FFE, the Fun Friday edition of the Aaro Right Sports Podcast. Here is what you need to know about today's show. We're going to talk a lot of NBA draft. We're going to talk about the broadcast, the coverage, the picks I liked, the picks I didn't, all that good stuff. From there, actually a lot of college hoops news from the last couple days. One, Dan Hurley gets his extension just like I told you he would. Two, did you see what Dan Hurley said maybe about John Calipari? It felt like Dan Hurley was just taking shots at John Calipari. I will explain what he said. Finally, how about our old buddy Will Wade? Back in the news, he gets his punishment. Very interesting punishment for him. Will Wade is back on the Aaro Right pod. And then finally, we will wrap Friday. Aaron Right, Aaron Wrong, best and worst takes of the last couple weeks. Busy show, fun show, a lot to get into. And so I don't want to waste any more time because we got a jam-packed show. Shows in late June are not supposed to be this good, yet here we are. So let's not waste any more time. And let's get to the topic of the day. Topic of the day, you already know, 2023 NBA draft. And I'll be blunt. Look, coming into the draft process, I think you guys could probably tell. I don't know that I was as into this draft as others. But what I will say is, as time has gone on, and really on draft night, as the picks are coming in and you see this guy's going there and you see the moms crying and this guy's happy and that guy's happy, I actually got really, really, really into it. And so what I want to do now is share some takeaways from Thursday night. I hate to be negative, and I don't want to start here, but there is one thing, even outside of all the picks, that I do have to start with, and I do want to discuss. I thought that was the worst group of analysts and the worst production that I have ever seen from ESPN. I know ESPN through the years has struggled to put together solid NBA crews. That's always the knock, right? TNT has Charles Barkley, Kenny, and Shaq and Chuck and Ernie Johnson. ESPN has never figured it out. But when you watch that draft, it just felt like, what was that desk that they put together? First of all, JJ Redick, listen, I know that I've had my personal beef with JJ Redick, and I'm just going to confess something. I actually think he's pretty good on the NBA. I think he's interesting. I think he's smart. I think when it comes to the NBA game, he's pretty solid. Here's the thing, though. We know this from his beef with me. He doesn't watch college basketball. He doesn't like college basketball. He doesn't enjoy the product. So the idea that you're going to put him on that broadcast and expect him to talk about guys that he clearly did not watch all season, like, I'm sorry. Like, why would he even be there? Now, if you want to put him like on the side with Woj and, hey, tell us how this guy fits with that, or what do you think of there is a spot for him in terms of analysis, but not on the main desk, not for a guy that acknowledges I do not watch college basketball. Andrea Carter, I'm sure she's fine, but I don't know. I don't want to be offensive to anybody, but I've never seen her on a men's college basketball broadcast before. Maybe she covers the NBA, didn't really understand her role. And then don't even get me started on Jay Bilas. Within 30 seconds, Jay Bilas is doing his Jay Bilas thing. Victor Wembanyama gets drafted, and what does he say? Well, he's not the most unique player ever because you can't be most unique. Unique is a standalone. Shut up, Jay Bilas. I just want to watch the draft without you trying to tell me how smart you are. And so you look at that crew. It's like, what was ESPN even doing? The crazy part is, I think ESPN has a lot of talent on its roster in terms of both the NBA and college. Fran Fraschilla should have been on that broadcast. Fran Fraschilla is as good on college basketball, on the NBA, on prospects as anybody in the media space. This is a guy, if you've ever heard him on Big 12 games, he knows these kids. He watches them in high school. He watches them in AAU. I can tell you from personal experience, I have seen him at AAU events. I've seen him at high school events. This is a guy that just eats, sleeps, and breathes basketball. and I think he should have been on this broadcast. Jimmy Dykes called 30 SEC games for Brandon Miller. 30, probably 10, 12 games of Anthony Black and Nick Smith. 10, 12, 15 games of Case and Wallace. Respectfully, he knows more about these guys than JJ Redick does. You want the NBA flair? Again, put JJ Redick on a side desk. Bring him in here or there. I don't need his reaction to every single pick when he doesn't watch the sport. And there's other NBA guys that I think you could have brought in to spice things up. I would have taken a small dose of Kendrick Perkins. I find him entertaining. Tim Legler, I find him relatively entertaining as well. Mark Jackson, Jeff Van Gundy. There are guys that I don't understand what that crew was, and I thought it took away from the broadcast. I don't feel like I learned anything. I don't feel like I got smarter. I don't even feel like half the people on that desk wanted to be there. So weird night overall, disappointing night overall, and I hate to be blunt. I hate to start on a negative, but it was just a weird broadcast overall. Let's get to some takeaways from the night itself. And let me start by saying this. Wembanyama was always going number one. I don't think there's very much interesting there. I've shared my thoughts. We've discussed. We've talked about it. There's really nothing new to break down when it comes to Wembanyama. Where it got interesting, though, was the number 2 overall pick, where the Charlotte Hornets selected Brandon Miller over Scoot Henderson. And why it's interesting, I hate to do the whole Torres told you, but it was very interesting because if you go back to a year ago, it's going to be Wembanyama 1, Scoot Henderson 2, and then there's a huge gap. And the one thing about me, you can like me, you can dislike me. I don't think the one thing that most people I don't think would argue with, I do try to do my homework. I do try to be fair and have an understanding of what I'm watching and what I'm talking about. And I bring it up because I remember specifically watching Alabama play Gonzaga in early December. And I remember sitting there saying, this Brandon Miller kid's pretty good. 6'9", averaged like 19 points per game, shooting 40-something% from 3. Why are we not talking about him as the potential number 2 pick in the draft? And so I bring it up because I'm going to pull up the tweet. So I tweeted this out in early December of 2022 when Alabama played Gonzaga. This is what I said. This is a tweet that I sent out in early December of 2022. I said, so I understand that Victor Wembanyama is a once-in-a-generation prospect. Totally get it. With that said, you're going to have a tough time convincing me that Alabama's Brandon Miller shouldn't go number 2 overall behind him in the next NBA draft. And when I said that, oh my goodness, you would have thought that I said that you would have thought that I was Kyrie Irving saying that the earth was flat. And Torres, you're just a college hoops guy, and you're just saying this because of blah, 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 and this and that. And I'm like, wait a second now. You guys and girls have told me forever that the NBA is, yes, it's a guard league, but it's also a wing league. You want those 3-and-D guys? Well, give me the guy that averaged 19 points per game on 38% three-point shooting. That's the guy that I want. And I know he had off-the-court issues. I'm not going to try to diminish that, but was really good on the court. Obviously, everyone did their homework on him. Everybody feels comfortable with that situation. And then I'll take it a step further as well, is that when I look at this situation, 1, 3-and-D guy, 2, I just like Brandon Miller's game. And when I looked at, and oh, by the way, the fit with LaMelo Ball makes so much more sense. Very young, very interesting core with Brandon Miller now joining LaMelo Ball, joining PJ Washington on that team. I think Charlotte becomes very interesting going forward. So I always thought Brandon Miller should be the number 2 guy. I always thought he was a talented player. By the way, please, and I heard this on the broadcast, I'm worried about he didn't play well in the NCAA tournament. Am I the only one that remembers that he got hurt in the opening round in the NCAA tournament? And oh, by the way, even after that, even after he got hurt in the NCAA tournament, guess what? He still had 19 points in the second round. And then he struggled against San Diego State. I will readily admit that. But you're going to tell me that a year's worth of film in the SEC playing Alabama or playing UConn in the out of conference, playing Michigan State, playing Gonzaga, playing North Carolina, that I'm supposed to be worried about one game against San Diego State when he was hurt? Give me a break. Brandon Miller always made sense as the number 2 pick. Number 3, with Scoot Henderson, let me say this. When I say that I would have taken Brandon Miller, that's not a knock on Scoot Henderson. That's just a reality that I thought Brandon Miller was the better prospect and made more sense. I think my perspective on Scoot Henderson going number 3 to Portland is that it's the same reaction everybody else had. It is that dichotomy of, does this mean that he's being drafted to play with Damian Lillard? Does this mean he's being drafted to have Damian Lillard be traded? Because that was the big talk coming in, right? Was that if Portland at number 3 had the chance to trade that pick, remember, we talked about it on Wednesday's show. Do you trade for Zion Williamson if you can? Is Zion Williamson available? Is Brandon Ingram available? Well, Portland kept the pick, and now it's going to be fascinating to see what happens next. Again, was Scoot Henderson drafted to play with Damian Lillard? Does this mean that Damian Lillard is getting traded? Does this mean that Scoot Henderson is the future of this team with Shaedon Sharpe? I don't know, but it feels like there's something else that's going to happen here. Either Scoot Henderson gets traded himself, or maybe Damian Lillard really is available this year in the offseason, and maybe he will finally be traded. Scoot Henderson goes number 3 to the Portland Trailblazers. Let's keep it going. Some other takeaways, number 4 and number 5, Amen and Asur Thompson going number 4 and number 5 to Houston and Detroit. Listen, I'll be blunt. I have no amazing takeaways about these two. I think they're both elite level athletes. They both have a lot of work to do from the skill perspective. From Houston's perspective, they've been rebuilding for 2, 3, 4 years, taking a lot of really young guys. Jalen Green a few years ago, Jabari Smith last year. Don't know that I would have gone with the all upside athlete because that's kind of already what they have. But listen, if you still feel like you're a year or 2 away, if you feel like that's the best prospect available, then I'm not going to criticize you for taking the guy. I'd add Detroit. They feel a little bit further along with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. So no fundamental issue with that. Let me just say, though, independent of that, it's just cool. Twin brothers, back-to-back picks, number 4, number 5 overall. Happy for those two. Happy for their parents. Think it's going to be really cool to watch unfold. Don't really know that I have a strong opinion on those picks, but congrats to them. Number 6, I'm not going to go through every pick, by the way, but I want to stick with number 6 because I told you. I said I thought Anthony Black was the second best college prospect on the board, and Anthony Black is the second college player taken off the board, going to Orlando at number 6. Love the pick, and really I love it because, one, I think Orlando is finally starting to build something with Paolo Banchero, with some of their young guys, but I also just love Anthony Black. We talked about it on Wednesday's show, 6'8", 6'7", whatever he is, still relatively new to basketball because he played so much high-level football growing up. But I just like a dude that's 6'7", 6'8", can handle the ball, can do all the things that he does. And then again, to listen to Eric Musselman talk about this kid, to listen to Eric Musselman explain the responsibilities that they gave him, the fact that he was a guy that was calling plays, that was changing sets and defensive sets in huddles. Now you're going to Orlando, really like that young core that they have coming up. Again, Paolo Banchero, Jalen Suggs, Franz Wagner, really like that young group there. Let's keep it going. The next pick that I really loved, was a guy that I told you I thought was being very undervalued in this draft. That was Cason Wallace going number 10, technically drafted by Dallas, but was traded to Oklahoma City. Listen, couple things. One, I know I just criticized Jay Billis 30 seconds ago, but the bottom line is, on the broadcast, he actually nailed Cason Wallace. There's a lot of talk of how good was he really? Watch the games. By the way, this is why you need college basketball analysts on this broadcast. It's because of the fact that Jay Billis nailed it. He said, look, the stats don't overwhelm you, but the second that Kentucky put the ball in his hands at Tennessee in Knoxville, that fateful Saturday. We all remember that game. Kentucky was a completely different team. And so you factor that in. You factor in that they were a different team with the ball in his hands. The fact that he's not even a natural point guard. I know I've said it a million times. He was recruited to play off the ball with Shaedon Sharpe. If Shaedon Sharpe plays, who knows what ends up happening? We don't need to relitigate the whole Shaedon Sharpe situation. But I bring it up, not even a point guard. Still finished with 11.5 points per game, 3.5, 4 assists per game, 2 steals per game. Elite defender. And what I really like is 2 things. Well, 3 things, really. One, I just think he's completely undervalued. I think if Kentucky puts the ball in his hands from day one, they're probably 2, 3, 4 wins better, especially if he stays healthy. He had some back issues. But 2, I like the fit with Oklahoma City, because Oklahoma City is just stockpiling all this young talent. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's already one of the best guards in the league. Josh Giddey's a rising star. We'll see what Chet Holmgren's like when he gets healthy. Jalen Williams, the rookie from Santa Clara, is really, really, really good. Now you add Cason Wallace to that mix. Are you kidding me? It's going to be phenomenal. I am so excited to watch this group. And finally, I would add this. Listen, I know I just criticized JJ Redick on top of Jay Billis, but Redick nailed like the most important point, which is when in doubt, bet on the Kentucky guard. And I know that might be an indictment of John Calipari and Torres. You hate Cal and you're always talking about Cal and all that stuff and blah, 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 this and that. But I just bring it up to very simply say that when I look at Cal, you can criticize for a lot of things, but his guards go to the NBA and his guards deliver in the NBA. Just watch the NBA playoffs. Jamal Murray balling out. Devin Booker balling out. People are already talking about the Phoenix Suns are not Kevin Durant's team. They're Devin Booker's team. Tyrese Maxey's a rising star. De'Aaron Fox is a rising star. I think Cason Wallace is that next guy. Always thought he was undervalued. Let's get to some other picks that I did like in the first round, and I'll try to rip through these really quick. Listen, Jordan Hawkins to New Orleans. Love it. Bottom line, I think he's the best shooter in the draft. Elite bucket getter, can get to the rim, can score. I just think he's undervalued. UConn was so good and so talented that he averaged 16.5 points per game. But really, if you go ahead and look, when UConn got hot late in the year into the NCAA tournament, it was when he really got going late in the year. This is a kid, 6'4", 6'5". Again, just an elite shooter. You go back to this last season at UConn, averaged 16 points per game on 41% three-point shooting. But again, go to when UConn got hot in the middle of the year, and he was unbelievable. 31 points against St. John's, 28 against Xavier, 26 against DePaul, 20 against Marquette, 20 against Seton Hall, 20 against Providence, 20 against St. John's in a second game, 24 in the season finale against Villanova, 19 in the Big East tournament, 24 against Arkansas, 20 against Gonzaga in the NCAA tournament. This guy is a star. I think he's going to fit in really nice. Another very nice piece for New Orleans. Listen, they got to figure out the Zion, Brandon Ingram element of things. But you look at Jose Alvarado, you look at Herb Jones, they have some nice young pieces. Jordan Hawkins is the next one. A couple other picks I liked. Jalen Hood-Schifino to the Lakers from Indiana. I'll tell you this. So Jalen Hood-Schifino, he was working out in LA. I didn't see him work out, but I can tell you, you talk to people that kind of hang out in those circles. They said they thought he was like one of the best prospects that they saw. 6'5", 6'6" guard. And really, it goes without saying, kind of like Cason Wallace. When Indiana put the ball in his hands, it was because of an injury to Xavier Johnson. Indiana really took off. And I still go back with Jalen Hood-Schifino to that game at Purdue when everyone's like, oh, Purdue's the number 1 team in the country, and they're this and they're that. And Jalen Hood-Schifino was just like, yeah, I got this. He was phenomenal in that game. You go back to that win at Purdue when he scored 35 points on a Saturday night in West Lafayette. It was a Fox game, national TV game. He was excellent. Like all these guys, he's a year or two away, but a really good, I think he can be a starting guard, a guy that can get you into your offense, a guy that can score himself As a freshman this year, he did finish on the season at Indiana, averaging 14 points per game, but came on strong late. I really like Jalen Hood-Schifino. Really like what the Utah Jazz did with Keontae George, the guard from Baylor, as well as Marcus Sasser, the guard from Houston. Two kind of different players. Marcus Sasser, kind of the veteran, the older guy, the guy that's been there, the guy that understands it, all that good stuff. Keontae George is the young upside guy. I think Keontae George, it was a weird year at Baylor. They started well, okay in the middle, struggled down the stretch. But this is a 6'5", 6'6" kid. He ends up going in this draft. Keontae George ends up going 16 overall. But you talk about a guy that if you told me in 5 years he's one of the 2 or 3 best players in this draft, I would absolutely believe it. Love the Utah Jazz getting him at number 16. Number 18, Jaime Jaquez going to the Miami Heat. Listen, I'll say this for Jaime Jaquez. That dude is just a hooper. He's just a baller. He lives in the gym. The UCLA guys love him. He's all about basketball. He is just such on brand with what the Miami Heat are all about. Actually, on Thursday night during the draft, I talked to somebody who's close to him. They were like, oh man, he's going to thrive there. It's a perfect fit. He's a great kid. He's all about basketball. Love that pick for the Miami Heat. And then going down a few more. One, Dariq Whitehead to Brooklyn. Dariq Whitehead, poor kid, went to Duke, was injured basically the entire year, but was, I think, maybe the best NBA prospect in this class. We never got to see it at Duke. If he clicks with Brooklyn, has a chance to be special. And in the same vein, the Charlotte Hornets, the last first-round pick of the Michael Jordan era, taking Nick Smith Jr. That's just one that I feel like, listen, he was the number 1 high school player in the class, much like Dariq Whitehead, was pretty banged up all season long. And it's just like, I'm telling you, you let that kid get healthy, be about the right things, work in your system. He's going to be playing alongside LaMelo Ball. He doesn't have to be a star. It's going to take time. But he's another one. If you tell me in 5 years, Nick Smith Jr. is the best player out of this draft, I would absolutely believe it. One more first-round pick, by the way, that I love. Julian Strawther, number 29 to the Indiana Pacers. I think he has a chance to be really, really, really good. And finally, let me say this too. I should mention that keep in mind, there's going to be a lot of trades. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on. And I only bring it up because of the fact stuff is going to change. If some of these guys get traded overnight into Friday, forgive me, but that's my immediate reaction. All right, so what I would do, take a quick break, come back. And when I come back, we are going to switch gears, talk college hoops. Dan Hurley gets his extension. Much deserved. We'll discuss that. Also, did you see what Dan Hurley said maybe about John Calipari? We'll take a quick break. We'll react to that. That's next. To the show in a minute. But before we do, I want to welcome back our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook, and the Betfred Sportsbook app. The NBA playoffs are here, and nobody has you covered quite like Betfred. By now, you know Betfred's story. Started in 1967 in the UK. Over 1,200 shops in the UK. They have since come to the United States and made a major splash. They are not only the presenting sponsor of the Aaro Torres podcast and all things Aaro Torres media, but also the Cincinnati Bengals, the Colorado Rockies, the Denver Broncos. And what I love about Betfred Sportsbook is that nobody takes care of their customers quite like Betfred. You've seen the Betfred Sportsbook suite at Bengals games. It is hopping. We have sent listeners of this show to Denver Broncos VIP tailgates. Betfred bettors have thrown out first pitches at Colorado Rockies games. Again, nobody takes care of you like Betfred Sportsbook does, and here is what they are doing for the NBA playoffs. How about this for a deal? Bet $50 on any game, all playoffs long, get up to $1,111 in free bets. Here's how it works. Download the Betfred Sportsbook app, bet $50 on any game. You automatically get $111 in free bets. But beyond that, here is what else Betfred does for you. They're going to give you up to $200 in insurance for the first 5 weeks that you're a Betfred customer. So maybe you make a bad pick. We all do. We've all been there. Trust me. You followed my picks in March Madness. It happens. So you bet 200, doesn't work out. Get 200 insurance for the first 5 weeks that you are a Betfred customer, equating up to $1,111 in free bets thanks to Betfred. Again, nobody takes care of you like Betfred does. Love working with them. They are the presenting sponsor of the Aaron Torres pod. Tell them Torres sent you. Download the Betfred Sportsbook app right now. All right, everybody. I am back. Good to be back. Do want to switch gears. And it's interesting because it's been actually a pretty busy couple days in the world of college hoops since the last time that I recorded the Aaron Torres pod. And why I bring it up is because there's been 3 or 4 stories that I do want to get to very quickly here post NBA draft. And the first one was bluntly something I've told you was coming for a while. If you remember, we've talked about this basically since the confetti started falling on UConn in Houston at the national championship game in early April, I should say, when UConn beat San Diego State. At that point, I had a lot of people ask me, okay, what is Dan Hurley's future? Is he locked into UConn forever? I had Kentucky fans, at least one that I vividly remember. I'm on the court interviewing like Donovan Clingan and whoever. And I got Kentucky fans saying, enjoy Dan Hurley now because we're coming for him the second John Calipari retires. I bring it up because on the flip side, I had UConn fans saying, we love Coach Hurley. Torres, is this thing going to get locked up? Why has he not received an extension yet? And I said, I did the old Mr. Miyagi, be patient, young grasshopper. Well, on Thursday afternoon or Thursday morning, I should say, it became official as Dan Hurley was given a 6-year, $31.5 million extension with incentives. It could be up to $33, $34, $35 million. And UConn has officially locked in Dan Hurley up until the end of this decade. And I would add, he is now very deservedly one of the highest paid coaches in college basketball. And so to me, listen, this was a no-brainer. And obviously, if you listen to this show, if you've been listening to this show, I'm not saying it because I'm a UConn guy. Like I've always just thought Hurley has been a rising star and was always the right guy for UConn. He didn't have that big, deep NCAA tournament run to prove it yet, but every single year they've gotten better. UConn is obviously, as you saw on Thursday night, now starting to produce NBA players. It's always interesting. You go back to those early Dan Hurley quotes. I actually asked him about this at the Final Four, and he said, when I got here, respectfully, these guys just didn't look like what UConn basketball players should look like. And so it's this 5-year rebuild. And as he pointed out, it was pre-portal. It was pre-NIL. You couldn't just flip a roster with 9, 10, 11, 12 new players in a single offseason. And it was this slow, gradual build that resulted in 2 NCAA tournaments coming into this year. And of course, the culmination with a dominant, literally one of the most dominant national championship runs we've ever seen. So it was much deserving. And let me take it a step further. It was much necessary because, as I just said a minute ago, this guy was making, I think, like $2.8, $2.9, like very good money, but not that life-changing college sports, I just won a national championship money. And so it's interesting because I guess there was a very little bit, I don't think there was a lot, of social media scuttlebutt. And do you really pay a basketball coach Yes, you pay a college basketball coach $5 million that won a national championship. Because if you want to play big boy college sports, you got to pay big boy money. Kirby Smart, as a football coach at Georgia, is making over $11 million right now. He is worth every single penny of that to the University of Georgia, and frankly, maybe more. Same with Nick Saban at Alabama. Same with Brian Kelly at LSU. Same with Bill Self at Kansas. Same with Lincoln Riley at USC. Same with Tom Izzo at Michigan State. And so if you want to play big boy sports, you got to pay big boy money. And the fear was exactly what I just talked about and what I've talked about all spring. You start messing around. You start trying to get cute. You start having Dan Hurley feel like he is not being respected by the university or by the administration and that he's underpaid. Let's just say somebody's going to make him that offer that he can't refuse. So for anybody, I don't think there were a lot of people that were pushing back on the numbers. But for people who were, you understand that if you lowball this man after he won a national championship, guess what? As I've said many times, in a year, Kentucky could have an opening for their college basketball coach. Think they don't want a 50-year-old guy that is coming off a national championship a year before? A guy that has built programs in high school at Wagner, at Rhode Island, and now at UConn? Oh, by the way, North Carolina, in theory, could open a year from now. Ohio State, which has some of the biggest coffers in college sports, it could open if Chris Holtmann, something happened with Chris Holtmann. Would he leave UConn for Ohio State? Probably not. You offer him $9 million a year, he'd probably have to strongly consider it. So it was a no-brainer, and now it's official, and now UConn fans can relax and put it in the rearview mirror. Looked it up with this extension and this raise. He is now, if my math is correct, the 6th highest paid college basketball coach in America. John Calipari, number 1, Bill Self, number 2, Tom Izzo, number 3. It's interesting. Rick Barnes is actually number 4. If you remember about 4 years ago, UCLA made a run at Rick Barnes and Tennessee gave him money to make sure that he never left for anywhere else. He's 5. Bruce Pearl, I believe, post Final Four, post number 1 in the country, is number 5. And then Dan Hurley is number 6. But congrats to Dan Hurley. This is deserved. And now UConn fans, you can take a deep breath. Your basketball program is in good hands for the next decade and change. And oh, by the way, when he wins big next year or the year after, he's going to get another bonus, another extension. Kind of reminds me of one of his former proteges, Nate Oates, signed a big 2-year extension in 2021 coming off that SEC title, then signs another one this year because he has much more success. And I think it's going to be the same with Dan Hurley. If he keeps winning at UConn, they are going to keep taking care of him. Good for UConn for getting this done. Really quickly, there was another Dan Hurley story that many of you guys sent me outside of the contract extension. There was a very interesting Dan Hurley story that many of you guys have passed on to me over the last couple days that I do just want to quickly address over, the next 4 or 5 minutes or so, because boy, oh boy, was it interesting. And it was interesting because of some comments he made that may or may not have been directed at John Calipari. And for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, and many of you maybe don't. So Dan Hurley and UConn's coaches were at one of these kind of, midsummer booster events. If you remember a year ago, this is where Nick Saban kind of went after Jimbo Fisher. It was one of those road tour caravan things where you get a bunch of boosters together. The fans are all drinking. You're trying to get them to have a good time, donate a little bit of money, rile them up, get them excited. Well, UConn had one earlier this week. Jim Moore was there. Dan Hurley was there. I believe Jim Penders, the baseball coach, and Chris Daly, the women's assistant basketball coach, Gino Auriemma's number 2, was there as well. Conversation gets going, and one of the questions that Dan Hurley is asked is about the NBA draft. And so he made a very interesting comment about where he planned to be on Thursday night as it pertained to Jordan Hawkins, who, of course, was in the green room on Thursday. So Dan Hurley basically talking about the opportunity to be in the green room with Jordan Hawkins. Here is what Dan Hurley had to say per Dave Borges, one of the UConn beat writers. Dan Hurley said this. He said, "We don't have all these banners on the wall because of players that came in as the number 1 player in the country and then left as the number 1 pick, and you basically babysat them for 6 months. We've been able to do it with players who coming in were not considered early entry or even NBA players at all. I think smart people recognize that you're improving and that player development is a real thing." So let me read that first part again. We don't have all these banners on the wall because of players that came in as the number 1 player in the country and then left as the number 1 pick, and you basically babysat them for 6 months. I bring it up. Some UConn fans sent me it. Some Kentucky fans sent me it. And many of you asked me one simple question. Torres, did your boy Dan Hurley just take a shot at John Calipari? And let me just say this. First of all, on the one hand, I can see where it would be perceived that way. And specifically about Calipari, right? Because at this point, yes, Duke is recruiting really, really, really well. But with Coach K retiring, Calipari has kind of reestablished himself. He's the guy. I want to build through elite freshmen. I'm going to do it the way that has worked for me rather than go the veteran route, the portal route, the 3-4 year guy route. So I can see where people would perceive that it was a shot at John Calipari. Now, I don't necessarily believe that it was, and let me explain why. One, it's not really how Dan Hurley operates, and I don't claim to know Dan Hurley. I've been in press conferences with him. I haven't really spent much time one-on-one with him. But one thing that has really impressed me about him, he does a great job of blocking out noise, blocking out what everybody else is talking about. He really doesn't care how Villanova is running their program, or how Kentucky is running their program, or Syracuse is running their program, or Georgetown, or Duke, or North Carolina. I don't think he really cares. I think what he's saying is what works for us, works for us. What works for them, works for them. I don't really care what everybody else is doing. And beyond that, I don't really think it was a shot at anybody else. I would add, I don't believe that John Calipari, even though he has had a couple disappointing seasons, I don't believe he babysits anybody. Guys come in, guys get better. Guys develop under his watch. As I've said many times, a lot of his best players were not can't-miss elite players. Devin Booker was not a perceived one-and-done when he committed to Kentucky. Tyler Hero was not a perceived one-and-done when he committed to Kentucky. So you go on and on down the list. One, I don't think Hurley was going after Calipari. And two, I don't think Calipari babysits anybody. Three, what I really think it was, to be perfectly honest, do you know what I think it was? I think it was Dan Hurley saying, we're doing something really special here at UConn, and you all need to pay attention. We are, and I truly believe this, and now I'm talking me as Aaron Torres, not me as paraphrasing Dan Hurley. I think you can already argue that Dan Hurley is maybe the best talent evaluator and developer in college basketball. It sounds crazy, but hear me out. Because remember, he took over a program that was coming off back-to-back losing seasons in the AAC. Here is what he has done in his short time at UConn. I'm just going to give you a few names. James Bouknight, UConn fans remember that, was the 66th ranked player in his high school class. He ended up being a lottery pick after 2 years at UConn under Dan Hurley in 2021. Tyrese Martin was ranked 226th in his high school class. He ends up committing to Dan Hurley at Rhode Island. He ends up transferring to UConn. He plays 2 years at UConn. How about this? He was the only player from the Big East, the entire Big East, Villanova, Providence, Georgetown, whomever, that was drafted in the 2022 NBA draft. So 226th in his high school class to being drafted a few years later after playing for Dan Hurley. Jordan Hawkins, 51st ranked player in his class. We know what happened the other night. Jordan Hawkins, by the way, crazy story, had never even visited UConn before enrolling. Basically, his junior year kind of coincided with COVID. He couldn't travel. He couldn't visit. He couldn't do this. He couldn't do that. That was probably why he was a little bit underrated. 51st in the country. It's clear he wasn't the 51st best player. Oh, by the way, Donovan Clingan, who I believe will be a top probably 10 to 15 pick next year, was 56th in his class, and I believe is a future first rounder. And so you look at Dan Hurley's track record, and oh, by the way, I'm not even going to include an Andre Jackson, who was ranked number 51 in his final recruiting class by 24/7 Sports. He is a guy that obviously is going to be in the NBA for a very long time. So I don't believe that this was a shot at anybody, specifically John Calipari. I think what Dan Hurley was saying was this, is that, listen, I've only been here 5 years, and we already got a natty. We already got some banners on the wall, and I'm doing it the old school way. I am developing NBA players. And it's not just Kentucky, by the way. It's Duke. It's anybody who brings in these one and dones, and a year later they're gone. That's not who we are. That's not what we're about. And what I believe Dan Hurley is trying to say is, like, if we offer you a scholarship, that should mean something to you, because that means that we believe you are an NBA player. We believe that you have NBA talent, even if maybe the evaluators don't see it, if the other recruiters don't see it, if other schools aren't offering you. If we think you're good enough to play here, we think you're good enough to play in the NBA. Lastly, I would just say this. It will be interesting to see if we start to get more of this, because the one thing I can kind of tell you from the UConn psyche is that, listen, what was the conversation after the Final Four? It was, is UConn a blue blood? Is UConn a historically great program? And I do think there's that little chip on the shoulder, East Coast, Northeast thing, not only from Dan Hurley, but from the entire UConn fan base. I include myself, because I never think UConn gets enough credit on the national landscape. And that dates back to Jim Calhoun. Now, if Jim Calhoun had said this, I absolutely believe he would have been taking a shot at somebody. And the old adage about Jim Calhoun was he actually took a lot of pride in what Dan Hurley was talking about. He used to love to get the players that the Dukes and the Carolinas didn't want and then beat Duke and Carolina with him. By the way, Jim Calhoun took 2 national championships away from Coach K, beating him in the 99 title game, beating him in 04 in the Final Four with my buddy JJ Redick. But I just bring it up because I look at these quotes. They're very interesting. Again, I had Kentucky fans reach out. I had UConn fans reach out. But when I look at them, I don't see a coach trying to go after another program, trying to take another shot, trying to do this, trying to do that. I actually see a coach that's trying to promote his program much more than take shots at anybody else. Finally, there was one last little piece of college hoops news that is worth monitoring and mentioning. And it comes from our old buddy. You may remember this name. Remember Will Wade, former LSU head coach? Got caught on wiretap talking about strong you-know-what offers? Well, on Thursday, it took forever, but we finally got resolution to the Will Wade situation at LSU and what is going to happen at LSU. Let me just say this. I was largely a defender of Will Wade. I largely thought a lot of the stuff was it sounded more salacious than it was. The NCAA came down on him, but not that hard. Now, remember, Will Wade has already been hired by another school, McNeese State, a small D1 school in Louisiana. He's already there, Lake Charles, Louisiana, got hired this offseason. Well, on Thursday, the NCAA came down with their punishment, and this was the punishment for Will Wade. He was given a 2-year show cause and a 10-game suspension for next season. I'll just be blunt. This is kind of a slap on the wrist for Will Wade, and it kind of confirms what I was telling you. If you actually looked at the facts of the case, it wasn't as bad as people said. Now, I'm not saying it was great, but I'm not saying it was bad either. First of all, I'll be blunt. Show cause usually means you have to show cause to hire somebody. So I guess because of the fact that he's already been hired, McNeese State doesn't have to do that. But a 10-game suspension, like, are you kidding me? McNeese State, which has no basketball history that I'm aware of. Now, Joe Dumars did go there, so I don't want to say they have no history, but probably not as much history as you would think, as much as whatever. They just got a coach that has won an SEC title, that went to, I think, 3 straight NCAA tournaments for sure. 2019, it would have been 4 straight if there had been a 2020 NCAA tournament. 2019, 21, 22, 3 straight NCAA tournaments, SEC title. And the fact that this guy's going to be able to coach there, I think it's a win for Will Wade. I think it's a win for McNeese State. Now, there are some other ancillary things, like Will Wade's not allowed to go on the road and recruit. I'll tell you, in the portal era, I don't really think it matters that much. You can send your assistants out to recruit on the road to build relationships with high school players. But the bottom line is, really realistically, you're talking about a coach and a person who bluntly, is going to kill in the portal. And he killed in the portal this offseason. Got, Zach Harvey, who started his career at Cincinnati, former top 50 prospect, is going to McNeese State. Mike Saunders, who played at Utah, going to McNeese State. CJ Felder, who last played at Florida, going to McNeese State. I'm just going to tell you right now, Will Wade has the best team in that conference by a mile. And oh, by the way, guess what? Next year, the conference tournament is on McNeese's home court. So I'm just telling you, Champ Week 2024, be ready. Will Wade's going to have the best team in his league. They are going to have home court advantage in their conference tournament. It would not shock me at all to see McNeese State in the 2024 NCAA tournament and Will Wade patrolling the sidelines. Thought Will Wade actually got off pretty easy here. But again, I think it's relative to expectations versus what the NCAA actually found. Will Wade, a 10-game suspension at McNeese State. And I do want to go ahead and wrap with America's favorite podcast segment, where Aaron was right, where Aaron was wrong. Been a few weeks since we did Aaron right, Aaron wrong, but by now, you know the drill. Yes, I stole this bit from my buddy Colin Cowherd. Colin does where Colin was right, where Colin was wrong every week. And I decided to steal it and bring it to the Aaron Torres pod. The reason why, it is very simple. It is because over the course of a week, a month, a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, nobody loves giving out hot sports takes more than your boy Torres. Torres said this, Torres said that. Oh my goodness, I'm so smart. Tell me how smart I am. I'm Torres. Here's the bottom line though. I get a lot of stuff wrong too. And so we started Aaron Right, Aaron Wrong as a fun way to wrap the week pretty much every week, giving you the best and worst sports takes of the week from yours truly, because even though I get stuff right, I get a lot of stuff wrong too. I have to be held accountable. So let's get to it. Aaron Right, Aaron Wrong, a lot of NBA draft, not exclusively the NBA draft today, but let's get to it. Where Aaron was right. So as I told you earlier in the show, back in December, I said, look, I get that Victor Wembanyama is a once-in-a-generation, once-in-a-lifetime type talent. 7'5", can shoot, can pass, can dribble, can do this, can do that. But I said back in December, when Alabama played Gonzaga, I said, you're going to have a hard time convincing me that Brandon Miller from Alabama should not be the number 2 pick in the draft. And at the time, Scoot Henderson was the consensus, universal, there's no possibility that anyone else can go number 2. And of course, when I suggested it, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, you're the college basketball guy. Yeah, what happened on Thursday night? Brandon Miller went number 2 overall. Listen, I like Scoot Henderson. I respect the hell out of him. I think he's a talented player, works hard, plays hard. But the NBA, I have seen the 6'3", 6'4" guy that's super athletic, that's not a great shooter, that does a lot of good things. I hate to say it, those guys come and go. Russell Westbrook, I said it on Tuesday's show. Russell Westbrook, he's a guy that listen, you go through. Russell Westbrook doesn't have a team right now. John Wall doesn't have a team right now. Derrick Rose is a backup. These guys come, these guys go. What you cannot find is guys that are 6'8", 6'9", that shoot 41, 42% from 3. And listen, I get that Brandon Miller had some very interesting things go on off the court, but obviously there were no major concerns there. He was the right pick. He should have been the second pick. And as I told you in December, I was dead right on that one. Where Aaron was wrong. So on Wednesday's show, I just said point blank, end of story. If I was the New Orleans Pelicans and there were rumors they were trying to trade Zion Williamson, I said, look, if I'm New Orleans, I am trading him because he now has personal issues off the court. But more importantly, he never plays, and he has shown me zero interest in actually playing through any sort of injuries. Even his own teammates like CJ McCollum called him out. Well, we got through Thursday night, and Zion Williamson is not only a member of the New Orleans Pelicans, but Adrian Wojnarowski said on the broadcast, he said, I talked to multiple GMs. Not a single one of them said that Zion Williamson was ever actually offered to me in a trade. So I bring it up because although it made for a great narrative, a great storyline, a great conversation, something that I believe, it does not appear as though Zion was ever actually on the trade market. I would have moved him, but that's just me. Instead, New Orleans keeps him, and we'll see what happens going forward. Where Aaron was right. Let's stick with the NBA draft, because what did I say on Wednesday? Who are the 2 players that I said, I think this guy's better than anybody thinks. There were 2 really that I said. I said Anthony Black and Cason Wallace. Well, Anthony Black was the second college player off the board, number 6 overall to Orlando. And then Cason Wallace, I think in a little bit of a surprise, goes in the top 10. Anthony Black was projected pretty high all process long. Cason Wallace more in like the 12 to 20 range. I'm here to tell you Oklahoma City made the right move on this one, as we discussed earlier in the show. Kentucky guards do not disappoint. And listen, I'll say this. I can criticize Jay Bilas for a lot, but he was spot on when he said, listen, the Tennessee game for Kentucky, they put the ball in his hands. He became a star, and that team played its best basketball when Cason Wallace became a point guard. So I'm not saying he's going to be a point guard in Oklahoma City, where Shai Gilgeous-Alexander clearly has that role. But that was a guy that I thought the entire draft process, I said, I don't get why he is so undervalued. Apparently Oklahoma City agreed, picked 10th by Dallas, but he is going to play in OKC next year. Where Aaron was wrong. Well, I also said that I didn't see why Jarris Walker, the forward from Houston, should be a top 10 pick. And yeah, he went number 8 overall to Washington, but he's going to end up playing in Indianapolis with the Indiana Pacers. Listen, it's nothing personal. I just feel like he's a little bit of that old school-ish big guy. He's not super athletic now. He's got a big wingspan, and his wingspan is 7'5". Yeah, but his feet don't move that fast. He's not a great three-point shooter. He's not a great defender in space. And I just feel like in 2021, you got to be able to do something at 6'11", 7'1". You either got to be an elite rim protector. You got to be an elite playmaker like a Jokic if you're not a great athlete. You have to be able to stretch the floor like so many guys can do in this era. I don't really know what Jarace Walker does. So maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I don't see something. He has always been a consensus top 10 pick. So I was just wrong on this one. I don't see it, but apparently the Indiana Pacers do. He was the 8th pick overall, headed to Indiana. Where Aaron was right. So let's get away from the NBA draft for a minute, and let's go to something that happened earlier this week when 5-star Jaren Stevenson was a part of the high school basketball class of 2024, one of the top 20 players in that class. He decided to reclassify and commit to Alabama. Why do I bring it up? Well, it is because you can go back in the archives of this show. There was a game in January of 2020 that was Nate Oates' first year at Alabama when he had Kyra Lewis and John Petty and all those guys. And I watched Alabama. I don't even know if they won. They played Auburn on like a Tuesday night. And I said, I don't know how good this Nate Oates guy is going to be, but he will be able to recruit because the one thing that he does is he plays a style that kids are going to want to play in. So you add in the fact that Brandon Miller obviously goes number 2 overall to Charlotte earlier on Thursday. Obviously, Noah Clowney, all that from Alabama. They've had draft picks last year. Herb Jones has emerged into a player. But I have said since day one, hour one, minute one with Nate Oates, he is the way he plays, the way he coaches, the way his teams play, the style of play, he is going to be able to recruit really well. Well, what ends up happening? Fresh off an SEC title this year, he locks in a 5-star 2024 kid who is going to reclassify and play next year, Jaren Stevenson, another really talented player at Alabama, and another guy that probably will eventually hear his name called on draft night. Where Aaron was wrong. So this is one I'm sad that I'm wrong about, because if you remember when Bob Huggins a few weeks ago made those inappropriate comments on radio, I was away on vacation, didn't really comment on it until I got back. And even when I got back, you know what I said? I said, look, it was dumb. It was stupid. I don't think it was a fireable offense. But at the same time, like, Huggins is too smart. He'll figure it out. He'll be smart. He'll do what needs to be done to make sure, that something like this doesn't happen again. Well, unfortunately, I was dead wrong. You don't need me to relitigate everything that has happened over the last 2 weeks at West Virginia. But obviously, you get arrested, 0.21 blood alcohol level, flat tire, all that good stuff. And the bottom line is, there's just no excuse. We talked about it on Monday's show. We talked about his daughter's comments on Wednesday's show. This is simply behavior that cannot happen if you are the face of a university and the basketball coach at a university. I've said it a few times this week. I hope Bob Huggins gets right. I hope alcohol, doesn't do him in. But you can't be the face of a university when you're behaving in the manner that he did. Thought he would figure it out after that incident a few weeks ago. Instead, a few weeks later, he's forced to resign. Where Aaron was right. So this is one I've been on all summer. Dan Hurley, as we discussed earlier, he got himself a nice little extension. Now, I said all off season, I said, I think he's going to be a $6 million a year basketball coach by the end of the summer. Poor guy's only coming in at 5.25. How is he going to live off 5.25 living in Glastonbury, Connecticut? I'm, of course, being sarcastic, but look, this man is deserving, and this is something I told you was going to happen. UConn understood what was at stake. UConn understood that their coach at 50 years old just won a national championship, and if everything goes right, this guy can be at UConn for another 15 to 20 years. Everything's rolling. Everything's going right. I never had a doubt that this deal was going to get done, and on Thursday, it becomes official. Dan Hurley locked up by UConn through 2024, through 2028, 2029, excuse me. Finally, where Aaron was wrong. So let's go to a little college football. How about some college football? Haven't talked a ton of college football lately. We will obviously, be continuing to discuss college football as things go forward. But why I bring it up, have you guys and girls been paying attention to what has happened at the University of Florida with Billy Napier? So I don't know that I've been critical of Billy Napier, but I guess concerned is the right word. Coming off a 6-7 year, don't love the team going into this year. Graham Mertz is their quarterback. And I've kind of said, I don't know if it's going to really work with Billy Napier. You had the weird thing with Jaden Rashada, the NIL stuff. Well, so far, Billy Napier is rolling. In the last week, Billy Napier, how about this? Got 3 4-star commits last Saturday in one single day. He got 3 4-star commits. And then later in the week on Monday, got a 5-star commitment from a defensive end named Jamonte Weller from Mississippi. Now, listen, I know recruiting is fluid. I know it changes. I know a lot of stuff doesn't go as planned. But right now, Florida has the number 3 class in the class of 2024. And this guy really might be built for the SEC and built for Florida. Slow start, but he's very methodical. He's very organized. He's very detail-oriented. You knew it was going to take a while for him to figure things out at Florida. Tough 2023 class, but 2024 is absolutely rolling. All right. I think that's it for this episode of the Aaro Torres Sports Podcast. I do think it is time for me to get out of here. If you're not subscribed, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure that you're subscribed to the Aaro Torres Sports Podcast. Also, make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead, give us a quick 5 stars. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, all that good stuff. Make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, 23K and counting. We're going for 30K before the start of football season. Help me get there. But that is really all for today's show. Fun show, busy week. Feel like there's a lot going on here for late June, and I'm so appreciative of you guys and girls along for the ride. Thank you again. I'll be back on Monday. Loaded Monday show. Cannot wait to get into it, but that's all for today. Shout out to Torcraig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Redick. You F-head. Unblock me, bro, but also get off the NBA draft coverage. We'll be back on Monday. New episode, Aaron Torres Pod.